You know, we all see those planes just cruising effortlessly up in the sky. But what if I told you that for the pilots inside, the biggest danger isn't some crazy storm or a catastrophic engine failure? Nope, it's something silent, invisible, and it comes from the very air that's holding them up.
So, let me ask you, what do you think is the most dangerous part of flying way up there at 30,000 feet? A sudden storm, maybe? Engine trouble? Well, the answer? It's probably not what you're thinking.
It's not the engines, it's not the weather, it's the air itself. Yeah, the thin, unforgiving atmosphere that, even as it's keeping the plane in the sky, can literally starve the brain of the one thing it needs most: oxygen.
So we're going to dive into this invisible threat. It's a constant danger in that thin air, and believe me, pilots have to respect it and manage it on every single high-altitude flight. Okay, so here's what makes this so incredibly treacherous. One of the main symptoms of oxygen deprivation is this false sense of security. They call it an inflated sense of well-being, or euphoria. Just imagine that for a second. You don't feel like you're in danger at all. In fact, you feel great, right up until it's way, way too late. That is what makes this thing so insidious. The official name for this condition is called hypoxia. And while the definition sounds simple, it's a really complex and life-threatening problem. It just means your body, and most critically your brain, just isn't getting enough oxygen from the air you're trying to breathe.
And the symptoms? Oh man, they are a checklist of things you never want a pilot to experience. It can start with something that sounds minor, like a subtle headache or feeling a bit drowsy, but it can quickly progress to impaired judgment, vision problems, and yep, even that dangerous euphoria we just talked about. And every single one of those things, it just completely compromises a pilot's ability to make safe decisions.
All right, so the big question is, why does this happen at high altitudes? Well, to really understand the solution, we first have to get into the science of how we breathe and figure out why, for our bodies, altitude is basically the enemy. Okay, here's a common misconception that trips a lot of people up. The air we breathe, right, it's about 21% oxygen. And that percentage, it stays the same whether you're standing on a beach or flying at 30,000 feet. So, if the percentage is the same, what's the problem? Why can't we just breathe normally up there? Well, turns out it's not about the percentage of oxygen at all. The real answer lies in a concept called partial pressure. And trust me, this explains everything. So, think about it like this. Down here at sea level, the total air pressure is high. It's like a heavy, invisible blanket is pressing down on everything. That pressure is what easily pushes oxygen from our lungs right into our bloodstream. No problem. But now, let's go up to 18,000 feet. At that altitude, the total air pressure gets cut in half, and that means the partial pressure of oxygen is also cut in half. All of a sudden, there just isn't enough push to get the oxygen from our lungs into our blood. We're breathing, but our body can't absorb what it needs to survive.
Okay, so now we get the problem, right? The air is just too thin. So how do we solve it? Well, it all starts with a very strict set of rules. Think of it as the FAA's safety net for every single time a pilot ascends into that thin air. The FAA's regulations are crystal clear, and they're all about creating layers of safety. Look at how it progresses. At 12,500 feet, the flight crew needs to be on oxygen if they're up there for more than 30 minutes. Why 30 minutes? Well, that's the point where fatigue and impaired judgment can start to creep in. Then you go up to 14,000 feet, and it's no longer an option, it's mandatory for the crew for the entire time they're up there. And at 15,000 feet, it's not just about the crew anymore. At that point, oxygen has to be provided for every single person on the plane. But, rules are just words on a page without the right equipment to back them up. And that equipment is literally the pilot's lifeline. It's all about the technology of breathing at altitude. Basically, there are three main types of oxygen systems, and each one is designed for different altitudes. The simplest is continuous flow. It's just a constant stream of oxygen. A step up is dilute or demand, which is a bit smarter. It mixes oxygen with the cabin air, but only gives it to you when you inhale. But then you get above 40,000 feet, and the game changes completely. The air pressure is so low that your lungs literally can't draw air in effectively anymore. That's when you need pressure demand, a system that actively forces oxygen into your lungs just to keep you conscious. And get this, it's not just any old oxygen. They use something called aviator's breathing oxygen, and it's 99.5% pure with almost zero water in it. Now that might sound like a tiny detail, but it is absolutely critical. Why? Because the water vapor you'd find in standard medical oxygen can freeze solid at high-altitude temperatures, and if that happens, it clogs the lines and cuts off the pilot's lifeline at the exact moment they need it most. So yeah, it's a huge deal.
So we've got the rules, and we've got the technology. But the final, and maybe the most critical piece of this whole puzzle, is the pilot. In the end, it all comes down to the human element and having a simple checklist to make sure everything is crystal clear.
I mean, listen to this first-hand account from a pilot. It really says it all. It's not just about avoiding a disaster. It's about maintaining peak performance up there. This pilot describes how the brain fog just clears and their decision-making feels faster. Using oxygen literally transforms what could be a fatiguing, dangerous ordeal into a comfortable, safe flight and lets them land feeling refreshed and sharp.
So to make sure that lifeline is 100% ready to go, pilots have a pre-flight ritual. It's a critical check they know by the acronym PRICE. It's just a simple, systematic way to make sure everything's good. They check the pressure and quantity, make sure the regulator is working, see that the indicator shows a flow, check that all the connections are secure, and finally make sure they're ready for any emergency. It's a simple habit that prevents absolute catastrophe.
And the whole goal of all of this? Well, it really comes down to one single number. Pilots use a small device called a pulse oximeter, and they are always aiming to keep their blood oxygen saturation above 95%. You can think of it like a fuel gauge for the human body. It's a real-time check that confirms their brain has exactly what it needs to fly the plane safely.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really important thought. The rules, they define the legal minimums. But a good pilot's job isn't just to follow rules. It's to manage risk. Many pilots will start using oxygen way below the legally required altitudes, especially when they're flying at night. So the real question is, when is it just smarter to breathe easy? And thinking about that question, well, that's what separates someone who just follows the rules from a true professional aviator.